Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Tear of the Prophets, Image in the Sand, and Shadows and Symbols, which are episode 26 of season 6 and episodes 1 and 2 of season 7 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as requested by my viewers. These episodes were requested by Adam Hall. So, Tear of the Prophets, Image in the Sand, and Shadows and Symbols are a three-part episode that begins with Sisko and Martok planning the invasion of Cardassian space in order to turn the tides of the Dominion War. Meanwhile, Jadzia announces that she and Worf are planning on having a baby. And on Cardassia, Gul Dukat returns to Damar and Wayum to tell them about a plan he has to use the Pal race to defeat the Prophets, thus opening the wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant again. So, Sisko executes the invasion of Cardassia by taking the Chintaka system, which isn't easy, but he manages to pull it off. But meanwhile, Gul Dukat beams onto Deep Space Nine to use the Pal race to enter the wormhole through one of their orbs. But Jadzia Dax stands in his way, so he kills her, and then the Pal race enter the wormhole, which closes it, thus cutting off the Bajorans from their prophets. Sisko is disheartened by this and Jadzia's death, and thus takes a leave of absence for an undetermined amount of time, where he returns to his father's restaurant on Earth, where he scrubs potatoes. Meanwhile, Kira has to deal with a permanent contingent of Romulans on Deep Space Nine, which started out okay until they secretly arm a Romulan hospital with high-tech weapons, and when Kira informs them that the Bajoran government orders them to remove these weapons, this starts a standoff that leads to Kira forming a blockade of Bajoran ships around this moon. Meanwhile, Worf is increasingly frustrated over Jadzia's death, and his friends determine it's because the way she was killed means she won't enter Klingon heaven, and in order to get her into Stover Core, Worf needs to win a great battle in her honor, but the problem is the Defiant isn't being assigned any combat. So Bashir talks to Martok, who invites Worf to go on a mission with him to destroy a Dominion shipyards. Bashir, O'Brien, and Quark decide to go with him in order to honor Jadzia. Meanwhile, Sisko gets visions of a strange woman, which leads him to discovering this woman is his real biological mother. His vision also tells him that he needs to go to a planet called Tyree to find the orb of the emissary that will save the prophets. So, as he, his father, and Jake prepare to depart, a young Trill Starfleet officer shows up who reveals she is the new host of Dax, whose name is Ezri. So Sisko takes her along with them. There they discover the orb, but Sisko is given fake visions to try to stop him. But with Ezri's help, he overcomes them and opens the orb, which reopens the wormhole and exiles the Pal race. When Kira sees this, she takes this as a sign, and she refuses to step down, even in the face of certain destruction. So eventually Admiral Ross sides with her and orders the Romulans to back down, which they do. And on the Klingon ship, with some maneuvering, they manage to destroy the shipyards and honor Jadzia's memory. So they are all reunited on Deep Space Nine, where Captain Sisko returns to service, and they are introduced to the new Dax. So these three episodes were requested all at once, so I decided to do them in one video, as they're pretty much a three-parter, although Image in the Sand and Shadows and Symbols are more of one story told over two episodes that serve as the conclusion to the sixth season finale, Tears of the Prophets, which tells a different story than the other two, but whatever, close enough. So first, let's tackle Tears of the Prophets, which I personally thought was a slightly disappointing as the sixth season finale, as I felt the sixth season was one of the best seasons Deep Space Nine has ever done, and overall a phenomenal season, and this episode was kind of just okay. Of course, it was held back because of the death of Jadzia Dax, which wasn't that satisfying of a death and felt out of place, but the producers of the show have since admitted that they did not want to kill her, but the actress was leaving and insisted upon this, and thus they had no choice. And I personally think that they did the best they could with what they were given, but yeah, she really shouldn't have died in the first place, but what are you gonna do? But I and many others I've talked to often wondered why Terry Farrell couldn't just stick it out for one more year, as the show was ending in just one season. But I heard apparently she was very difficult to work with, particularly in the later years, and acted like she didn't want to be there. There are quotes from her where she puts it more delicately and says she felt that she did all she could with that character and it was time for her to move on. However, thankfully, the nature of Dax being a Trill made it easier for them to find her replacement, as they could just simply put the Dax symbiote in another host, and thus in a way keep the same character while at the same time introducing a new one. This couldn't have been done if it was someone like Kira O'Brien or Bashir who was killed off, so they're kind of lucky in that way. And I did think they did a good job with Desiree Dax. It's just a bit ridiculous that they had to introduce a new main cast member for just one season, but again, there was nothing that they could do about it. But now let me talk about where I think these 3 episodes falter a bit and why I don't think that highly of them, and that's mainly because of the storyline with the Prophets and the Pile Race, which honestly I thought was never handled very well in the show and always felt shoehorned in, and it wasn't really that necessary. Plus, it was totally inconsistent with how the Prophets were originally established. As in the premiere episode, Emissary, they were established as strange aliens that had no knowledge of corporeal matters that the Bajorans mistook and worshipped as gods because, of their strange and powerful nature. Whereas the dynamic set up in later seasons and explored in these episodes was more of a powerful being who are essentially gods to the Bajoran people and are in this epic battle of good versus evil with the evil version of the Prophets known as the Pile Race, and the story of Deep Space Nine thus ends up translating into an epic battle between Captain Sisko on the side of the Prophets, the side of good, while Dukat is on the side of the Pile Race, the side of evil. So it takes a complex science fiction story with a lot of poignant social commentary and turns it into a typical fantasy trope of good versus evil, and I'm not sure how much I approve of it, and that's not really Star Trek-y. I did learn to accept it that the show decided to change focus in later seasons, but it was never really that interesting. And what's even worse is that in this 3-parter, it is revealed that Sisko's biological mother was taken over by a prophet for a while in order for Benjamin to be born. So basically this episode is saying the prophets arranged Sisko's birth. And this is totally preposterous, totally and completely inconsistent with the rest of the series, as the wormhole aliens were very clearly established as having no knowledge of Sisko or corporeal matters. Hell, they didn't even understand the concept of linear time. But now all of a sudden we're supposed to believe they had planned Sisko's birth all along so that he could be their emissary. I'm sorry, but that is total horseshit. In an interview once, showrunner Stephen I. Robert talked about his desire in the later seasons to turn Sisko into a god, and that's basically what they did here, regardless of the fact that it makes no sense and doesn't really match up to anything that's already been established. So I'm sorry, but the only way I can look at this is bad writing. So getting back to Tears of the Prophets in particular, it wasn't a bad episode by any means. The prospect of them turning the Dominion War around and starting the invasion was an interesting one. It was pulled off in a pretty exciting fashion. I just felt it was undercut by the Pile Race storyline, in fact seemed to be playing second fiddle to it, and thus wasn't the main focus of the episode, which is where I think it failed. Also, the way it ended with Sisko scrubbing potatoes back on Earth felt like a really weak season-ending cliffhanger, one in which I wasn't really that invested in or worried about in the least, mainly because it felt really contrived and rushed, so I never quite bought it. And although they did the best they could with Jadzia's death, it still felt out of place and shoehorned in, so I also consider that a negative. But getting more into the 7th season premieres, Image in the Sand and Shadow and Symbols, these episodes too were just alright. It was an interesting format they came up with by setting the cast up into 3 distinct different groups. Kira and Odo on the Bajoran and Romulan standoff storyline, O'Brien, Bashir, Quark, and Worf in the Klingon ship storyline, and Captain Sisko, Jake, Ezri, Dax, and the storyline with reopening the wormhole. So first, let me get into the Kira storyline with her throwing up a blockade to prevent the Romulans to going to their base until they agree to remove the weapons from the base. The writers explained their intention for this storyline was to be an analogy to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and in that regard I think it kind of fails, as the stakes don't really seem nearly as high, and frankly it all comes off as a bit contrived. First of all, this storyline seems to spit in the face of continuity in favor of plot convenience, as it's been established that Starfleet are only there on Deep Space Nine at the invitation of the Bajoran government to act as administrators of the station, but the station is theirs. But in this episode, Admiral Ross tells Kira that the Romulans are coming aboard the station, and the decision has been made, and there's nothing that she can do about it. Now, all they had to do to fix this was to have Admiral Ross mention that they already got consent from the Bajoran government, but because he didn't, it comes off as Starfleet telling Bajor what to do on their own station, which is not how the power structure has been established. And the whole thing about the crisis where Bajor gives the Romulans permissions to put a hospital on one of their moons, but the Romulans secretly put weapons on it, and Bajor gives the Romulans conditions, get rid of the weapons or leave. Starfleet should back Bajor 100%, as it's their moon, their property. So if they won't, they want them to leave, then the Romulans remaining there essentially is an invasion force, and it's ridiculous to suggest that Starfleet would support this. Therefore, the whole storyline had fake stakes, because when Ross capitulates to Kira in the end, it was kind of expected. In fact, he should have done it way earlier had they stuck with the logic established in the show. That being said, this was an intense storyline, and I did appreciate how they had Kira stick to her guns and not back off even in the face of certain death. I thought this was a great character building moment for her, and a great way to make her relevant to the show again. As for the Worf storyline on the Klingon vessel, I thought the whole storyline about them trying to get Jadzia into Sto-vo-kor was pretty weak, to be honest. And it was a bit silly that Quark went along, as he just stood on the bridge and did nothing but whine. In fact, I'd say he was really annoying during this whole storyline. Although I did kind of like the story about Bashir and O'Brien being worried about Worf and devising a way to make him feel better, and Worf reconciling his jealousy over the relationship Jadzia had with her friends. So this storyline was okay as well, but not great. And the storyline with Captain Sisko was just silly. Other than the whole reveal of his mother being a wormhole alien, it just felt over the top silly. Like that Bajoran kid who showed up to stab him, that served no purpose whatsoever, as he seemed to be just perfectly okay in the very next scene, and we never saw that kid again. And then they went on this journey to this desert planet, which they were, setting up as some huge adventure, but really they just walked in the desert for a few hours and then randomly found the orb. Sisko freaked out a little bit, and then they opened it. And the whole thing with the Pa Ray sending him false visions to stop him, fake stakes. fake stakes. And then this episode tries to add in a little, sequel to Far Beyond the Stars, because, that was a popular episode where we get to see Damar playing a psychologist trying to get Benny to erase his writing. And this translated somehow into Captain Sisko covering up the orb, and this was just ridiculous and did not work at all. And it did not at all recapture the magic of Far Beyond the Stars, and felt just like a nonsensical add-on and lame attempt to try to, be like that great episode. But you do have to appreciate Avery Brooks' acting in this scene, as he can do insane very well. So to see him play, a loony Benny Russell was a lot of fun. Nobody does crazy better than Avery Brooks. So my rating for Tears of the Prophets, Image in the Sand, and Shadows and Symbols out of 10 is a 6 good. These episodes were fine, kind of underwhelming as a finale/premiere, but not terrible either. There was nothing about these episodes that were horrible, but nothing about them that were great either. So, some moments were good character building moments. The death of Jadzia was sad, and the introduction of Ezri was intriguing, and it was great to see the Federation invade Cardassian space, and for Kira to stand up to a bully. But the Bajoran prophecy, the prophets and the hocus pocus with the paw race was a bit silly. So all in all, these episodes were just slightly above average. So that's it from my review of Tears of the Prophets, Image in the Sand, and Shadows and Symbols. If there's an episode from any of the fine Star Trek series you'd like me to review, just leave a comment with the episode you'd like me to review, and I'll endeavor to do so, but please only one episode request per person. And be sure to check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, and many more videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.